Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel where we offer an alternative view to the common narrative. Today is July the 7th, 2023.
Yes, and we're going to talk about the counteroffensive in Ukraine. And the big question is, what counteroffensive?
Yes, so everyone keeps speaking about this counteroffensive, and the more I hear it, the more I'm thinking, what counteroffensive? It is,
Yeah, well, the counteroffensive was actually very hyped up, but then it was supposed to go into the spring, and now it's in summer, and the so-called counteroffensive finally started in beginning of June. And so it was called, and then it was very successful, and then the Ukrainians said no, and it was only a taste of what was to come, and basically nothing happened, etc. And I'm still waiting for the big counteroffensive.
Nothing is still happening.
Yeah. Now, when I looked at and listened to all these people, and they say, yes, there's about, the Ukrainians have accumulated about 80,000 men, and a lot of artillery and a lot of tanks and armor and so forth. And they are going to try to smash the defensive lines of Russia itself. But the way that they always talk is that as if Russia is a non-entity. It's like a black box. And nobody talks about it. And it's all about the Ukrainian forces, and oh, they're going to smash it. And then we heard that the German Panzers, the Leopard's going to come in, and they are a Wunderwaffen, and they're going to destroy the Russian defenses. And, well, in the first couple of attacks, so-called attacks, well, some of the German tanks were taken out and destroyed. But one should actually first try to establish, this is not a counteroffensive. This is an official offense. Counteroffensive is when another party does the offense and it comes to a standstill, then you react and you do a counteroffensive. But we're always talking about the same thing. The narrative is usually that the Ukrainians cannot win. And nobody understands why the Ukrainians are always attacking. And everybody thinks that, says that Zelensky must prove that Ukrainian forces are willing and capable of defeating the Russians. And if they don't fail, then the West will start not supporting them. And it's all Zelensky's responsibility, and etc., etc. But I'm getting sick and tired of this bloody narrative. At the end, on the one side, all these sort of pro-Russian commentators, even this pro-Western commentators, they always talk about Zelensky. But on the other side, they say the same thing, is that the Americans were planning with the Ukrainians the counteroffensive, and they were basically training them and all this other nonsense that goes with it. And well, then the Americans must also take responsibility for this so-called counteroffensive. When it fails,
it's all Zelensky's fault.
No, it's not Zelensky's fault. Yeah. Zelensky is just the puppet, the politician puppet there. We have talked about that before and so on. And I told you that there were about sort of three groups in Ukraine itself. This was Zelensky, the government, if you want to call it. Then there is the so-called right-wing Nazis, who can really control everything. And then there's the regular army and so on. But, just for the sakes, I don't know. Have you ever heard in the last couple of months and so on that anybody talks about the Azov battalion or Swobodna? And nobody talks about these radical rights anymore. So what has happened to them suddenly? Are they all killed in the Azov steel factory? And so on? No. And I'm getting sick and tired of all the same thing over and over and over. When we heard about Bakhmut, I was talking about Much. And it was Bakhmut. And that's all you heard. And nobody ever talked about the rest of the front line, which is more than 1,000 kilometers long. So I'm not sure about the viewers, but I'm sure they get tired about the same narrative.
Counteroffensive, Ukraine is destroyed, and and nothing's really happening.
And then they came out with this story about Leopard Pants tanks. Oh, they are so good. But what they forget about is reality. It's a tank.
Mm-hmm.
It is a piece of metal that has a cannon, and it has electronics inside there, and then they have a couple of men inside there. And that's the tanks. And all the tanks are more or less the same. And the only thing that really differs between them is the electronics inside them, the guns sometimes. But that's about it. So if you shoot it with an anti-tank weapon, it will burn.
Yeah.
And you get two types of anti-tank weapons. The one is like a dual cone, because sometimes they have reactive armor, which I don't see on the Leopards. And then you have a kinetic projectile that you can't really stop, because from kinetic it shoots off the turret of a tank or whatever. It penetrates it through pure kinetic energy.
Mm.
And that's it. And it doesn't matter what tank you have.
What about the amounts? Do they line up? Do the Russians have the same amount as the Ukrainians, or are they vastly outnumbered?
Oh, yeah, and that brings me to another point, actually. I notice. Again, it's all this limited narrative. So the first thing was that the guys that our experts, we all know about the experts, said that the Ukrainian army was now destroyed 3 times. The Ukrainians had 3 armies. The first one was the start of the SMO, and boom, that was destroyed with Soviet weapons. So the Ukrainians had no more Soviet weapons. Then the second army, Ukrainian army, was assembled. The first army was about 200,000 men. Ukraine had about 200,000 men. And then all the existing stock of hardware and so on, ammunition, was destroyed by the Russians, so the first army is gone. So then the Ukrainians had another call-up, got another couple of troops, and then they were presented, or present? Present.
Oh,
yeah. They were given presents by the other old Soviet satellite countries like Poland and Romania and all. So they were giving them all their Soviet era weapons, and that was destroyed last year. And now the Western have given them weapons.
When they're not faulty weapons, I heard something.
Yeah, no. Those were all working because they were used to.
Okay.
And then the Western NATO decided, okay, they're also going to contribute a number of weapons. Last year they gave them a number of artillery pieces and self-propelled artillery pieces, and so forth. And I think it was, then they gave them Patriot missiles, and they gave them some tanks now.
Some planes?
No, not yet. Okay. But in any case, so I think in total they were given about 25 or 30 Leopard tanks, about 12 Leclercs, and about, I think, 12 or 14 Centurion tanks from Britain. Well, we haven't heard that any British or French tanks have been destroyed, but we heard that a number of Panzers were destroyed. Now, this is now the third army that's being destroyed. But then the Russian military comes and makes the announcement that they destroyed more than 265 tanks.
Mm-hmm.
But the West didn't give them 265 tanks. So where does this 265 tanks come from? Oh, but they were destroyed in the first army and the second army. But how come they're still in the third army available? So everybody's like underestimating the Ukrainian forces. And initially we had 200,000 troops with the start of the SMO. Then there were a number of call-ups by the Ukrainians. Then the Ukrainians suddenly had 700,000 men. And they're all done. They're all gone. They're all dead. That's a total, okay, say maximum 700. So now they only got 80,000 men left. But they have a population of about, say, 40 million. Of, say, 8 million is in the Donbass, so they're gone. Then about 10 million has emigrated to the West, but those were all women and children and old men. So the bulk of the remaining people were all men, remaining in Ukraine.
Suitable to go to war,
yeah.
actually.
So let's take a stupid figure like 20 million people can still are remaining. And in Ukraine, you have 20,000 people where you can select your soldiers from, and most of them are men because all the old men and all the women have left and children. But you cannot assemble a military of 1 million men. But I just want to say that in South Africa, I was we had to go to the army for about 2 years, and we did have to do our national service. And at that stage, our army from national conscripts was about 110,000 men each year. So our army was 110,000 strong, but only the whites did military service. And the amount of whites in South Africa at that stage was 5 million. So out of a 5 million population, South Africa can push each year 110,000 men into the field. So I'm telling you straightforward that assembling, I think at that stage we could have assembled about 1.5 to 2 million soldiers at any given time, given all the training that we had over the years. And Ukraine, out of 20 million, cannot even assemble 1 million men. How does that work? So I wish people start, we have talked about this in the other videos, is that people look at this, and if they have information, they look at this and apply it on a point. It's like Bakhmut. Everything revolved around Bakhmut and Prigozhin and the Wagner group, but nobody thought about the rest of the front. They were also skirmishes. But in any case, I'm talking again, I'm running away, so maybe I should give you a chance.
Something that I wanted to ask, what about the surrounding countries that do support Ukraine? What about their armies? What about their population? Surely they could get some sort of backup from these, Poland, maybe Lithuania.
Yeah, but see, the biggest, call it Russian haters, are the old Soviet Union countries, which is the Balkans, the Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, and so on. But they're all small countries. I can't remember I always get confused between Latvia and Lithuania. And I think one of them has 2 million population of 2 million people. So they can't really give any information, weapons. They cannot give any soldiers. In fact, there is a contingency of about, I think, 10,000 German soldiers being stationed or supposed to be stationed in Lithuania. But Germany is still trying to assemble all these men and all the equipment.
The other NATO countries?
Yeah, then you have Poland, but Poland, they're all part of NATO.
Yeah.
So if they join the fight, then they draw in NATO. And the stronger people in NATO is America and the old countries, and they won't allow it because they don't really want to get involved in the war. So Romania is not that vocal. Slovakia is not that vocal. The biggest vocal people are the 3 Balkans countries, and Poland. It's like... And then America finds himself like the tail wagging the dog. Not the other way around.
What about this conference on I think it's the 10th of July with NATO and perhaps Sweden and what another country, I can't remember. Oh, obviously Ukraine. So they're going to get together for a conference. Do you think that Russia is waiting currently? And that's why there's no progression happening or serious progression happening in this moment? Or what do you think is going to happen there, essentially? Are they going to come to a peace agreement? Are they going to continue the war?
You see, that's the biggest question. When SMO started, the Special Military Operation, it was supposed to be like a limited military operation. And what should have happened, and I've talked about it in my previous videos, there was analysis done by American expert, academia still, but the point was here that they should go into a defensive mode, the Ukrainians, and let the Russians advance and bash their heads against defensive lines, and thereby create damage on the Russians, and then the cost versus benefit would be too big.
Draws suck as
Yeah,
much
so
money.
and manpower and death and political problems and so on. But the Ukrainians never did that.
The word counter-offensive completely.
Actually they would have capitulated within the first couple of weeks because of the way that the Russians attacked. And there was an agreement, and Putin showed the agreement that was signed by Ukraine a couple of weeks back to the African contingency. In any case, so the NATO said that we will supply you with weapons and we will support you as long as it takes. And then Ukraine changed their mind. Now, if you do that, you have to ask yourself the question is, all right, what they're going to do. So NATO provide them all with their old weapons, and that was destroyed, supposedly destroyed. But I showed you just now 265 tanks, and where did those come from? So I don't believe that all the stuff was destroyed in any case. And then, well, Ukraine was, again, if you want to attack, you have to have weapons. And the Soviet-era weapons were also lacking ammunition. So they only could get that from the old states. So America escalated the whole conflict by providing first the HIMARS.
But why not provide enough? There's this question. Okay,
but that's the big question.
Yeah, why not? Why is that?
But I'm still trying to explain the whole Vilnius the story. So every time they escalated and they provided new weapons, and Russia red lines were basically crossed, but Russia did nothing. And I called it like a salami type of diplomacy. They were synthesized, so they were escalating it, and then. They said then they were supplying them with drones, and then they were supplying them with artillery pieces, and then with self-propelled artillery, and then with no tanks, and then the tanks were given, and then no this, and that was given. And every time the Russians basically escalated the war, and the Russians did nothing, which we can understand because Putin doesn't really want to go to war with NATO. Because it will result in a nuclear war, and that will serve nobody. And he believed that the Russian army can destroy all this equipment. So there is no real Wunderwaffe and stuff like that that will basically the Russian army can't handle. Then the painted systems came, but now the F-16s are supposed to come. Now, right, I already heard that the training for the F-16 pilots haven't even started. That's here in a month, more than a month, and it's all and everything is sort of delayed, and the amount of weapons, is again the Americans sort of planned the whole counter-offensive or assisted the Ukrainian command in doing it, but I think that it was a joint development because America has a technology of simulating battle, sort of battles itself, like a chessboard, but it's computer generated. And then they can determine the outcome of that. And the Americans have all the satellites, so they knew precisely what the Russians were doing. And they have the intelligence network, and they know what he's doing. So they must have been involved significantly in a counteroffensive. But they don't give enough weapons. What do you want to do with 30 tanks? What do you want to do with, say, 30 Abrams tanks, which is still not delivered? You're demanding of these guys to be successful in a counter-offensive, and but you're giving them limited weapons, and you know that if you want to attack, you have to have a certain superiority. I don't like this 1-to-3 ratio. That's bullshit. That is like 1970 or 1980 type of warfare, but not in today's terms. Today's terms, you have to consider technology and the mobility and speed and protection and all other stuff that goes with it into a certain ratio.
Before you go on, which type?
No, I'm not confused. And you know me, I talk a long way about that. Any case, so the counter-offensive is failing big time. And there's a big backtrack now, and there's a big story about Zelensky that says you haven't given me enough money, weapons, and I'm still waiting for this and still waiting for that, and I need more tanks and I need more artillery, and so the question is, again, the narrative, Zelensky must perform for political reasons to impress the NATO at the Vilnius, but actually the Vilnius meeting should actually be a wake-up call for the NATO that says whatever they planned, whatever they have done to now is insufficient. It's not going to result in the defeat of the Russians. And now the big question is what they're going to do. And the only option they do really have is to escalate. Under no circumstances are they talking about peace. In fact, they are more aggressive against Russia. So peace is not an option on the table. Forget about what everybody else is saying. Those are all silent. You know, most of the stuff you actually hear in the newspaper, and then our friends, the commentators, then they quote people that are not even in government, like retired people or retired parliament. They have no saying. It's like noise on the horizon. So you shouldn't take care of that.
Zelensky also made a statement, I don't know if it was yesterday, but it was recently, about one of the dams being blown up or potentially going to be blown up by no one else except the Russians. He stated very clearly that the only danger is the Russians, which automatically makes me think, okay, it's not the Russians. It's not going to be the Russians.
Nobody blows up his own stuff.
Yeah. No, so they're going, not a dam, it's a nuclear plant. I don't know where it is again, or...
Yeah, well, I know it's Zaporizhzhia, but the point here is that the Kharkov, no, not Kharkov, something with a K dam, the Russians were occupying it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the Russians were at on the other side of the Dnieper River, past the Kherson city, and there was the front. And then last year, October about. And then Surovikin came into command, and he said, at that time, the Ukrainians were bombarding the dam. And then they accused the Russians of doing it themselves. But they were still bombarding them. And then Surovikin thought, okay, that's a danger if the dam breaks. So he's going to, for his troops, so he's going to withdraw his troops. And that's now why they're on the other side of the Dnieper River. So it doesn't matter how you see it. The Ukrainians always fired on the dam, and they accused Russia. And then finally, in this year, they did fire it again, and the dam did break, and they accused the Russians again.
And they use it,
but it was them.
Yeah, but they use it as an excuse for what they. I know they played it around so they could.
Well, propaganda and blame. But why I'm actually mentioning this thing is a typical example. The same happens with a nuclear plant, the biggest plant in Europe, on the Zaporizhzhia. Is that last year they have been constantly attacking the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. They have even sent commandos over the river. They have bombarded it with UAVs. These are all known facts, and they always blame the Russians on it. But now we have the inspection authorities, the IEA, and they have sent people and they investigated and they found nothing. And then they left some people behind. And these people are now on the plant itself. They are watching it. And again, recently Zelensky said that the Russians are trying to blow it themselves up. But the IAEA inspectors are on site and they've investigated the accusation. They said no, there are no explosives around the baths. There's no explosives on the roofs. There's nothing like that. So whatever Zelensky says is a lie. It's propaganda. But I don't think that they will do it, because Russia's reaction will treat it as a nuclear attack, and they will respond in kind. And unfortunately, if Zelensky is bad enough to do it, then he must understand that will be, for sure, 100% his death sentence. The Russians won't let that one slip again.
The thing is, he sounds very desperate, so, he's at... Yeah.
But just again, is it Zelensky? Is it the right wing, or is it the Secret Service?
Wasn't it the Secret Service?
The guys that actually, who's in command of Ukraine? That's a big problem.
Then I think either it was the Secret Service that threatened him if he doesn't do certain, if he makes peace with Russia way back, they'll hang him from a tree.
Yeah, that was the right word.
Okay. So it's not, everything is not necessarily Zelensky's choice, but he's also almost stuck between a rock and a hard place sometimes. So, it's almost like Biden.
He's the actor.
Yeah.
He's the face. He's the propaganda. He's the media personality. I mean, he was an actor, a comedian, and now he's a president, and now he's a war president. What makes him anything qualified to even?
Well, he's a good actor, so he can act like a
Yeah.
president.
So, but then they use an actor, and then even then, the CIA is also on the ground, and they are monitoring Zelensky, and they're probably monitoring all the other guys as well. But I'm not like the UIV attacks on Moscow. That is a secret service, and I don't think Zelensky knows even about that.
Drone attacks also.
Yeah, the drone attacks on Moscow. The cross-border incursion into Belgorod, I don't think Zelensky knows about or is informed about it. That is the right-wing part of the military. Then you look at the Nord Stream pipeline, and I'm sorry, I believe it was Ukraine, and it would have been a secret service. And they wouldn't have notified Zelensky about that because these guys are all running their own show and they have their own objectives. And they're not going to consult Zelensky. They don't have much respect for him in that respect. It's like the Kursk bridge attack. That was secret service, the Ukraine secret service. I mean, if you look at all the what the Russians have exposed about that operation, it all pointed back to the secret service. So I wish people would stop blaming and putting everything on Zelensky and put it on his other two cronies parties, put it on the Americans, put it on CIA, and don't forget that Biden is also a puppet. So don't stop blaming Biden for all the decisions. He's not making any decisions. It's the deep state that makes the decisions. But poor Biden, he's...
Shame, it's like when things go well, it's Zelensky or Biden, and if it doesn't go well, it's also Zelensky and Biden. But it's not
it's not them. They're not really doing it. They haven't got that influence on that. I mean, there were some corruption charges and so on, and it was pointed out by the Americans, and Zelensky fired a number of them, but only a few. The rest of the corrupt people all remain the same.
Yeah,
why?
The important ones.
Why? Because if they fired them, he would have died. They would have killed them. I mean, we all know Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. So, I'm sorry about that. But coming back to the meeting from NATO and Vilnius, I'm thinking that there are a number of countries that are sort of now starting to go against the war. I think Hungary is the most prominent speaker in that sense. There's I think that the Germans and the French and the rest of the old Europe were always against the war per se, but they were forced in by America into that positions. They have sacrificed their countries in terms of the economies of these countries, and they are starting to feel the backlash. But they have to continue with the narrative. They all, when they started the war, they all thought, or they were all told and convinced that should the war start, they will issue sanctions, which were a long time prepared before the war, against Russia, and that will destroy the Russian economy. And when it happened, when it didn't happen, they had to continue. And then they were told, no, sanctions are not immediate effect. You have to wait a little bit. And then they waited a little bit, about 6 months and so on. But then their own economy started to suffer. And they started to see, but nothing is happening in Russia, but they are suffering. So the effects started to appear in their systems. And then they moaned about the special subsidy that the Americans were giving to their companies. So they saw it as an imbalance in the trade. They saw America was benefiting from the arms supplies to Ukraine, and they had to pay it out of their own pockets, and because it was only as a loan or as a present to Ukraine. And they saw they are now pulling at the short end of the stick. And they have their own problems, getting worse and worse and worse. So I think there will be a slow kickback against the action in Ukraine, but not 100% one. And if they want to continue, it will probably be America and countries like Poland and Lithuania and Romania and Slovakia and so on. But those are about the countries that I think will continue supporting Ukraine. Just for a second, so I read this other article. So we had these leopards that was now delivered to Ukraine, and then there was an agreement made that there will be a repair station built in Poland. And now this thing is not being built, and the delay is actually caused by a dispute between the Polish and the Germans.
Oh,
and it's not about whatever you think; it's all about money. The Germans are saying that the Polish want too much money for each repair and certification of the tanks. And then you can see it's a question of money. The war goes about money and profit. It's not an ideological. Some people don't see it as ideological. Some people do see it as ideological. And it is a sort of an existential battle between Russia, the East, the new multipolarity world, and the old NATO Western world and so on. So there is other dimensions to the whole thing. And I've explained many times, the world is a lot more complex than what it seems, and simplification doesn't work.
Categories, yeah.
Yeah. So there will be some fighting. They will say they are united. They are not united as a NATO.
Clearly.
NATO is sort of crumbling in a lot of aspects. We just saw that they couldn't select a new head for NATO, and Stoltenberg has been extended for another year. And that was because the British wanted their guy in, and Americans said no. Americans wanted von der Leyen there. The rest said no. And then Stoltenberg, they couldn't come to an agreement on a simple, basic thing: is who's going to lead NATO, who's in any case just
Who's
a
the
puppet.
next puppet?
It's just another puppet. So I don't know why. So, and Bulgaria, and now the weapons story between the repairs of the Panzers between no.
Doesn't sound good.
And the delays in the F-16s, which I don't understand why. We can talk a little about the military aspects of the counteroffensive itself, why it's failing actually.
Yeah.
So what I can explain is that, all these things are basically half-hearted. Nothing is like committed to anything. The defense of Bakhmut was partial. It lasted more than 10 months. It was a sort of a gradual thing. It was like a sort of a meat grinder. And this is now not how things are done. This is not how wars are done. Then you only have skirmishes. So when in the beginning of June, when the Ukrainians actually started their so-called offensive, their big battle, they ran into a minefield. And they couldn't progress, and they returned. And since all the other battles that were started, they have not even reached the first defensive lines of the Russians. And then they are all returning and shot to hell and losing hardware and manpower and so on. They apparently, about 13,000 men have already been killed. But it's only a number with no credibility. It's like I said, you have 80,000 troops. What do you want to do? You want to fight? The Russian army has more than 500,000 men, and you want to attack and do a counteroffensive with 80,000 men, and you don't even commit the 80,000 men. You only commit 2 or 3 brigades, which is about 8,000 men, and then you think you're going to have these defeat these huge and effective defensive lines of the Russians, but you have no air support, and you have not enough artillery. You have no softening of the targets.
It's like David and Goliath without the success story. It's successful indeed.
Yeah, well, you take away the David sling.
Yeah.
So all you can do is pick up a stone.
Yeah.
And then you expect him to win. No, you can't do that. But, I mean, when I asked the same question when I saw that, I asked myself, but don't the Ukrainians know where the minefields are? Didn't they do any intelligence gatherings or try to find out how the whole defensive lines were set up? Surely they have all the satellite photos. And the first thing I would have done is I would have cleared the minefields by artillery fire. Just drop a hell of a lot of artillery, explode every mine that there is and so on, and then progress forward. And I would sort of do a couple of fields so I don't limit myself to one attack vector, so I have multiple options, but at least the minefields are gone. And if they are repaired by the Russians, then I put another military artillery fire on there. So they have no air defense systems. So they want the F-16. So what's the F-16 going to do? Is the F-16 going to do and come to the front and then have dogfights with the Russian aircraft? No. They are going to be used as bombers. So, but you don't have the aircraft, but the Russian aircraft. So what do? You move all your air defense systems to the front, where you're going to do the attack of the counter-offensive. But none of these things were done. It's just like...
Why? Is it incompetence? Is it just... People mention that they haven't been in a war for a very long time, and especially, I don't understand why this is happening. It's not like it's some small... People are dying.
I actually just got the answer to that.
Mm.
Again, there's Zelensky. He sits in Kiev. The big General Kahuna, he's sitting in Kiev. But the real soldiers are sitting about 600 kilometers or more away from him. They have to do the attack. And they know it's futile. And they know it's a death sentence. So what they do is they just send small groups of men. They know they're going to lose them. But at least it's small groups of men. So you allow 10,000 guys to die instead of 80,000, 100,000 men to die. I think the soldiers, the military commanders, are actually silently refusing the instructions of the real military. And I think that's why there's nothing really happened. I mean, still a month later and still nothing is happening. And they also is not going to happen. And there's still a huge amount of men in the rear of Ukraine. Not only part of the 80,000 men, but more. They have more than 700,000 men in arms. So, and they should have some more hardware in panzers and so on. So, they are, the real commanders are not progressing. So, they have to sacrifice men. And it is said that they are these untrained people, but I have a problem with this training as well. It's like, training. What training do these guys require? You have a rifle, and you have ammunition, and there's the enemy, and that is what you have to kill. That's how all soldiers work. There's a specialist, are the officers. The officers know all the tactics. So the officers must be well trained, yes. Because they guide the men. The men only follow instructions, and all they have to do is be able to shoot the rifle and hit the target. And then you have special groups, yes, like the anti-tank weapons or the mortar groups, but that also doesn't take you months to learn. It takes you a week, 2 weeks. There's nothing, and then you can shoot a couple of rounds each day. I mean, really. How long does it take you to learn to ride a bicycle? So, even these F-16s, these guys are trained to fly an aircraft. What's so special about an F-16? Yes, if you want to use the F-16 to its utmost 100% dogfight capability, then you have to have long training. But you're not going to use that. You're going to use it for basically bombing runs and then standoff air targeting or tank targeting. So you have to know the targeting system, and for that you have to fly each day at least twice and do bombing runs at least once a day. And then how long does it take you? 2 months max, not 2 years. When you drive a tank, it's got gear levers or whatever, and that's it. How much more do you want to... All the tanks drive the same, more or less.
It's difficult to put it, like you can look at it strategically, but also like to remember that these are people still. It's very difficult. If you say like, you just need someone to pick up a rifle and be able to shoot, like, on the board, it's that simple, but...
But it is simple. When the Americans had in the Second World War, Colonel Douglas MacGregor, I think it was him or no, they said they have 12 million men, the Americans. They didn't have an army of 12 million men. They trained conscripts, 12 million men, in a record period of maximum 3 months. And then they were shipped to the front. What did they learn? What we learned. We had 3 months basic training. Not me, but our infantry. They did discipline. That was marching. PT to get them fit. And then we had training like a little bit of theory, but most of them are not intellectually very strong. No, the average people is not that intelligent. So you let them practice. You take them to the shooting range, and that's a couple of times. And then again marching, and then movement. And after 3 months, they were sent to the front in South Africa. And they had all the necessary skills to do what they had to do. And so is every soldier being done, because that's all they have to do. It is the officers that tell them to do. Those are the important guys. And like I said, I mean, you drive a vehicle. You have driven a tank, so you know more or less how a big chunk of steel feels and how it maneuvers and so on. And that's it. And you know what's the difference between one tank and another tank?
It's like driving a car and then just getting in another.
But not even that. But say you are the enemy and I'm an enemy. It is how fast I can see you, and how fast I can reload, and how accurate I can shoot you. Now, say you have a T-72 tank on the one side, and you have the Leopard on the other side. Then whoever sees you will destroy the other tank. And it's not like when you look at the specification of a tank, it says, yeah, it's 4,000, 5,000 can take out a tank. No. Engagement is maximum 800 meters that you can shoot another tank. Because you got to see it. And you got a sight. And I mean, come on. And then all guns have sights and they have a telescope, and it's the same thing with, I mean, I saw once an article about the Ukrainians were operating a Panzer 2000 PZH, the German one. And I said, it's fantastic. You only have to press a button. They had to work out everything. And then you got computers. So it's much easier for them. Pressing a button.
It's a button and people die.
Yeah, but you understand, this hype about training, or the weak guys, those are normal, and all infantry are infantry. And it doesn't, you can give me a Marine. I don't give a shit. I'll take a regular infantry that knows how to shoot, and I'll take your Marine on and I will kill your Marine. Because it's rifle against rifle. Machine gun against machine gun. That is how it works. And this whole thing about maneuvering and so on, those are all, those maneuvering warfare. Oh, okay, so what does it mean? So you take one tank or two tanks, and then 4 APCs, and then 2 fighting vehicles. They're all in different commands, and then you order them, and they're going to attack it. What maneuvering are you doing? You ride a vehicle. So you go left, you go right, or you go forward, you go backwards. Oh, you got to coordinate them. Yes, what? Well, okay, with artillery. Well, that's what's done in the old time as well. The German panzers also called in the artillery. So, I don't know. Strategies and tactics are determined right there on the battlefront. With a general tactic and a general strategy compiled and planned by the generals. The overall scope. But if I'm going to lie behind that stone, or I'm going to lie behind that bush, or jump into this ravine and so on, that is what's going to keep me alive, or will let me die. And whether there's a minefield or not, that minefield, what I'm talking about, should have been identified by the high command. No, it wasn't done. So I don't know.
Unnecessary careless deaths.
Yeah. I see this whole thing about it is so blamable unnecessary. And what does it result in? So we can see of some of the commentators, they have sort of daily feedbacks on battles and so on. This town, that town. But it all means nothing. Absolute nothing. You can might as well say that the contact line is basically static. So if the front lines move by 500 meters or 5 kilometers, it means nothing. Absolutely nothing. It has no strategic advantage. Okay, it has a strategic advantage if it was planned for something event. But in reality, if it wasn't planned, it was just I'm going to occupy that city or that town, and that does mean actually nothing. Nothing. And men die for nothing. And it's, and men die on both sides. It's not only the Russians, the Ukrainians are dying. And nothing is achieved. In any case. But I wanted to say actually what I wanted. Yes, at this stage I think about, initially I thought I talked about in some of my other videos on what the progress would be. And I said that the Ukrainians will sort of try to do a counteroffensive, they will be destroyed. And then the Russians will do the proper counteroffensive and drive the Ukrainians back. But I'm starting to question that narrative as well of mine, because I don't see much movement or intentions by the Russians to move forward. I see no aggressive behavior on their side or from their leadership. And the Ukrainians, like I said, they lose 10 or 12,000 men in their sort of counteroffensive out of so-called 80,000 men, which is not 80,000 men. So they still got about 60, 70,000 men left. And then they got all the troops that nobody's mentioned about. So for the opportunity for the Russians to move forward, I'm not so sure if that's going to be accepted or if that's going to be done by the Russians. To move up, to push them back until the other side of the Leopard River and just in front of Kiev. But anyway, the Russians must do something. They can't let it go as it is. So I'm not totally sure how the scene will... Well, we're all waiting for Vilnius, no? See what
will happen there. Okay.
So I don't know. Did I tell you enough today about the story?
Yes, I think so. Okay, everyone, we've come to the end of our video now. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, subscribe, like, and share with your friends and family. Till next time, goodbye.
Till next time. Cheers.